Friends, it's Mother's Day, and I thought I'd share a little bit from the mother, the mommy that I work with, Mommy Goose, and also a little story about my own mother, Hazel Norris Flannery, whom many of you know. Now, Mommy Goose is an Appalachian bird. Like cows love corn, she loves words. She says, corn can be yellow, blue, or white, and words change colors in different light. To talk like your flock is no disgrace. Just use the right word in the right place. The first thing that I'll share with you from Mommy brings up an image for me of my Aunt Maudie Norris. And I can still see her after she would have been cleaning the house and wiping everything down in the kitchen and mopping the floor. And she'd be tired and her cheeks would be kind of flushed red, and she'd sit at the table and she would enjoy a Red Rock Cola. She would pour it into a glass, a little bit of it at a time. This is a mommy poem, but the speaker to me here is a little girl, and she's telling what her mother did. And she says, the kitchen was dirty. Mommy had to mop. She cleaned every crumb. She wouldn't stop. Then she sat at the table and drunk her a pop. The next one I'll share about a mother involves an accident. And again, it's a child reporting on what happened. And the mother had climbed way up in an apple tree to get that beautiful big apple that grew way up high, as they sometimes do, and she fell. The child says, when Mommy fell out of the apple tree, she got right up and went on a spree. Well, let's see how Mommy fell. If we look at Minnie Atkins' carving here, we can see that Mommy fell on her head. When Mommy fell out of the apple tree, she got right up and went on a spree. She danced a jig on the feather bread and baked 2 bushels of gingerbread. She used our tablecloth for a cape and made a necklace with measuring tape. She tried to crochet with her feet way up in the night before she fell asleep. Next morning she stomped in the kitchen and said, who tracked mud all over my bed? Why, look at the floor all covered with crumbs. And where did all this gingerbread come from? I don't know who I have to thank for being so pure as to pull such a prank, but I'll find out before the day's through, and they'll be in big trouble when I do. Mommy doesn't tell us whether or not that mother ever found the real culprit for doing all those things, but I suspect that would have been some information that the children would have been more than happy to share. My own mother, Hazel, became a widow when I was 16, when my father passed away at age 44. Ironically, the same age as my mother's father when he died, when he was killed in an accident working on the L&N Railroad. I left home at 17 to attend Eastern Kentucky University, and I never came back to live. I would, of course, come back to visit, but not to live. But then about 30 years later, when I was 46 years old, my mother came to live with me. Mother had been experiencing some burning in her chest when she would walk. So I took her to St. Joseph Hospital for a heart exam, and when they injected that dye delivering mechanism down into the main artery of her heart, it was 98% blocked, and a little debris flaked off and it cinched up just like a pump, and she died. She died several times, the doctors told me, over the next few hours, and they would finally get her heart going, and eventually they were able to do emergency bypass, and after 18 days in the hospital, she was able to go home. But she never wanted to go back to McKee again. She'd say, if I had been up there when that happened, I would never have lived. So she came to live with me. And I had been living by myself for several years. So I was sort of used to doing things my way. And when Mother came in, it required some adjustments, and it wasn't always easy. For example, not being able anymore to put my feet up on the coffee table, or having to keep my bedroom picked up, or having a curfew. Of course, the allowance came in handy. But it worked the other way too. I irritated Mother just probably as much as she irritated me at times. And one topic that the irritation often was around was food. Now, the doctors had told us both, one of them in particular, the surgeon, just before she left St. Joseph Hospital, he said, now, your arteries are very small in your veins that we used, and we did the surgery very quickly. And those bypass grafts, those could block very, very easily. So it would be better if you ate very little saturated fat, particularly meat. In fact, it'd be better if you didn't eat any at all, if you ate a plant-based diet of vegetables and fruit. Well, Mother, of course, being a home economics teacher, she was kind of set in her ways, but that experience in the hospital made a real impression on her. And she did try to get away from the meat, and eventually we both gave it up. And I started reading about how diet can affect your health, and I read that in addition to eating the low-fat plant-based diet, one fat that you can have that seems to be pretty healthy is olive oil. And then as I read further, I read that one of the bad things you want to avoid is refined grains like white flour and white rice that have had all the fiber stripped away. And complying with this diet wasn't too hard for me, with one exception. I had one kryptonite, one thing that did in all my resolve that I couldn't resist, and that was biscuits. And to this day, you could probably lead me over a cliff with a biscuit. Well, I kept reading about this whole grain and this olive oil, and one day I had an idea. It happens sometimes. And I said, Mother, I want you to make us some biscuits with olive oil and whole wheat flour. Oh, you can't make biscuits with olive oil and whole wheat flour. You've got to have buttermilk, and you've got to have white flour. So she wasn't into that idea, but I kept on. And I've been told that my mother could be relentlessly persistent when she wanted to do something. And I've also heard that about myself. And I guess I was relentlessly persistent, so I just kept on. Why don't you try some of those biscuits? Well, you know, it wouldn't hurt to try. So finally she said, okay, I'll make a little batch, but not much, because this is not going to work. So she did. She made them up, and she put them in the oven to bake. And bacon, they smelled pretty good. And she took them out of the oven, but they looked a little different. Her biscuits were normally big and fluffy, and these were little flat, real low to the ground biscuits. So I got one off the tray there and took a bite of it, and it wasn't bad, but it wasn't real good. But it was hot, and hot bread, you can't hardly go wrong with that. So I ate a couple of them. Mother reached over and she pinched off a little piece, and she took a bite and she said, not fit to eat. And I said, well, let's keep them. You know, I thought they were okay. So we put them in the refrigerator. And the next day I got one out, and I thought I'd just try one cold, and I bit into it. And it was kind of like you were biting into something that had a cardboard on the top and the bottom and sawdust in the middle. It wasn't good at all. And I went over and threw it in the trash can, and Mother was in there. I said, I guess we'll have to throw these away. She said, no, don't throw them away. We won't waste them. I'll eat them. Mother wasn't big on throwing food or anything else away. So she did eat them over the next few days. She would cut one in half and toast it in our little toaster oven, and then put strawberry preserves on it and eat it. But after 2 or 3 days, I noticed she was having a hard time cutting that biscuit in two, but she'd saw it in two, and then she'd heated up in that little toaster oven. And near the end of the batch of the biscuits, after she'd had her oatmeal one morning, I saw her biting into the biscuits. She had caps on her 2 front teeth. They hadn't grown in right, and she started to bite it, but she wasn't getting through, and she thought better of it, so she took it over to the side and bit through it. And when it snapped in two, it sounded sort of like a small twig breaking. But she finished them all, and she ate the biscuits. And after that, I didn't bring it up again, because the results were pretty clear, so we just ate whole wheat bread toasted in the toaster. But one evening, she was watching Wheel of Fortune. She liked to watch that show. I didn't care for it, but I was sitting in there just to keep her company. And all of a sudden, during a commercial, she kind of looked up and she said, "Well, I can make cornbread with olive oil, and corn is a whole grain. What about that?" And I said, "Well, that sounds good." So she did. And the cornbread with olive oil was really good. So for the next 10 years, almost every night for supper, we'd have cornbread, and sometime for lunch. I have to say that as good as it was, by the end of that 10 years, I was getting pretty tired of it. But today, looking back on it, wouldn't I love to have a piece of her cornbread? I'd even celebrate one of those cardboard biscuits. So it being Mother's Day, let's honor our mothers either in person or in memory and value them the way that they should be valued. So I'm going to bring Mommy Goose in here. Mommy slept late. She's still wearing her nightcap. And Mommy and I will wish you all a good May the 9th and a happy Mother's Day. Bye-bye.